In the story of the Philippine Revolution, the death of Gomburza is pointed to as one of the principal reasons why Filipinos decided to rebel against Spanish rule. But few know why they were executed, and why their deaths were so important. That is what we're going to find out today. But first, we need to find out how the Philippines came under Spanish rule in the first place. In 1521, Ferdinand Magellan led an expedition to find the Spice Islands by going west, and on their route, they encountered the Philippine archipelago. He would then be caught in a local dispute and was eventually killed. The remaining members of his expedition left the archipelago and eventually made their way back to Spain. After that, Spain sent several more expeditions to explore and eventually conquer the islands. It wasn't until 1565 that the majority of the islands were conquered by Miguel Lopez de Legazpi, and that it was established as a colony of Spain. It was henceforth named the Philippines, after King Philip II of Spain. For the following centuries, the Spanish maintained their grip on the Philippines, but throughout that time, there were many revolts against Spanish rule, such as the Silang Revolt in 1762 and the Dagohoy Revolt in 1744. Revolts like these would cause much trouble for the Spanish, so to help in their rule, they would employ local soldiers to keep the peace. Fast forward a couple of centuries to the year 1869, when the influence of new liberal ideas has spread throughout the world, Spain included. These liberal ideas would eventually reach the Philippines, most notably in the form of the new Governor-General, Carlos Maria de la Torre. Governor de la Torre was a liberal. He would pass many such laws, and there are three of note. First, he relaxed media censorship, which allowed many Filipinos to have access to liberal literature. Second, he established the Guardia Civil, or the Civil Guard in the Philippines. They were like police, but were part of the army. Joining them would grant Filipinos certain privileges such as tax exemption and exemption from forced labor. Third, he began the process of secularizing the education system. This meant taking away the power of Spanish friars to control the schools, and giving native priests control of their own churches. However, this would cause him to be disliked by the Spanish priests, but in turn be well liked by the native priests who wanted secularization. This period of liberal reform would soon end in 1871, when Governor de la Torre was replaced by Governor Rafael Izquierdo. While under him, new technologies such as the steamship and the telegraph were introduced to the Philippines, he would be more famous, or rather infamous, for his iron fist type of government. He disliked the liberal reforms made by de la Torre and would work against them. He would argue for the increased censorship of the press, and more importantly, he removed the privileges that the Guardia Civil enjoyed. These changes were unpopular among Filipinos, especially among the Guardia Civil. Things would come to a breaking point on January 20, 1872. Angered at having their privileges revoked and their pay reduced, around 200 soldiers and laborers, led by Sergeant Fernando Labadrid, captured Fort San Felipe in the province of Cavite, killing the Spanish officers inside. The mutineers hoped that the other soldiers would join them, but when they called a nearby infantry company, they refused and soon attacked the mutineers. Because of this, they stayed inside the fort. When news of the fighting reached Manila, the seat of the colonial government, Governor-General Izquierdo quickly dispatched men under the command of General Espinar to recapture the fort. When they arrived, they saw that the mutineers were being kept at bay by the loyalist infantry. The arrival of reinforcements from Manila sealed their fate. The mutiny was soon crushed, and many of them, including Sergeant Lamadrid, were killed. Any survivors were soon arrested. The Cavite Mutiny by its own was not very significant. What would be significant, however, is how the colonial government responded to it. When an official investigation to the mutiny was made, the colonial government reported that the mutineers were part of a plot to cause a revolution and overthrow the government. Many prominent Filipinos were accused of being supporters of the plot. Many of the suspects were prominent leaders, lawyers, and influential residents from Manila and Cavite. Also, with the advice of the Spanish friars, Governor Izquierdo emphasized the role of the native priests in the quote-unquote revolution, saying that they supported the rebels and were thus enemies of Spain. So among the people who were arrested were three native priests, Mariana Gomez, Jose Burgos, and Jacinto Zamora. They were well-known figures of the secularization movement which wanted to reduce the friars' powers, so this made them prime targets for the Spanish. In the ensuing trials, the three priests were pointed to as the masterminds behind the Cavite Mutiny. There was very little evidence to support these claims, but they were found guilty anyway and soon convicted. Out of all of those who were arrested, 70 people were given death sentences. Some of the sentences were later reduced to life in prison, or exiled to the more remote islands such as the Marianas or Guam. Doomed to be executed, however, were the three priests, Mariano Gomez, Jose Burgos, and Jacinto Zamora, as well as a soldier, Francisco Saldua. He was the main witness that testified against the three priests and claimed that they were behind the mutiny. He was actually promised a pardon in exchange for his testimony, but he would be executed along with the others. On February 17, 1872, the priests were brought to Bagong Bayan Field. They were executed by garrote, a device that tightens an iron collar around a person's neck until they are killed. The three priests would then be remembered as the Gomburza, owing to the first letters of their surnames. In the attempt of the colonial government to crush a so-called revolution, they made future revolution almost inevitable. The death of Gomburza is seen by many as the start of Filipino nationalism. Immediately after, their trial and execution were seen by many Filipinos as a grave injustice, and soon the three priests were made martyrs, killed by Spanish cruelty. But the unintended consequences of the crackdown did not end there. Many of those who were exiled to the Marianas and Guam would eventually escape to Europe, where they would go on to start the propaganda movement. There, they will publish newspapers and pamphlets that advocated for reforms back in the Philippines. One of the propaganda movement's future members, Dr. Jose Rizal, dedicated his second novel, El Filibusterismo, to the martyred priests. In referring to them, he wrote in the book, "I have the right to dedicate my work to you, as victims of evil which I undertake to combat." Dr. Rizal will eventually meet the same fate as the three priests. On December 30, 1896, he is executed by firing squad at Bagong Bayan, the same place where Gomburza were executed. His charges? Connection to the ongoing revolution. The revolution that the Spanish tried to stop all those years ago has finally arrived.